You know, our next presenter really needs no introduction. You know, we were very fortunate to have Ron Klein in the company for many, many years, and I don't think that there's anybody in this room who was around back then that thought we'd ever see, you know, the next incarnation of Ron Klein. We thought, you know, that's something that could only be accomplished back then when they were working from stacks of leads this high. And but man, lightning did strike twice in Ken Pike. I think this year, where are you at? I don't mean to embarrass you, but where are you at face-wise this year alone? Like just gross sales.
4.6.
Isn't that crazy? And people always ask me, you know, what's Ken Pike's secret? And I mean, spend 30 seconds talking to Ken Pike, and you know, there is no secret. I mean, he's genuine. He really is service first. And I will say this. He works harder, he calls more, and he's more committed than anybody I've ever met. You know, even today, he was like, yeah, I need to find time today to go and make some calls to make sure that my week is full. So I mean, a guy that's sold 4.6 million so far this year, on his way to $5 million, getting close to Christmas here. If anybody could mail it in, it would be Ken Pike. But anyway, so it's a real privilege to have him here today. And yeah.
Is that a record?
What's that?
Is that a record? Do we know?
Well,
any other person that's done it?
Ron has been at around the 5 mark. There, he's going to be, yeah, right there, like neck and neck. So, yeah. Anyway.
It's really simple. I just say, you had me at hello. Can I invite my appointment? No, my appointment. Miss Lucas, how are you?
Fine.
And nice to meet you. Thanks for having me in your home. Although I'm welcoming you into your own home. Please come have a seat. Thank you for. So, how long have you lived in this community? Tell me about what that stage is like. I'm pretty excited about that. So, are your kids kind of spread all over the place? Where do they
Well,
live?
3 sons in Fort St. John and one
Okay.
daughter and her family in Prince George.
Okay. So within, I don't know the area that well. So how far is that out from where you are? It's about a drive, a couple hours drive.
Well, the drive from Prince George to Fort St. John
Yeah.
is 5 hours.
5 hours. It's a good distance. Yeah. So how often do you get up to see them?
Not as often as I used to.
Yeah. Yeah. Do they come to see you more?
No.
No? Okay, not as much. Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. I always wonder here, as the generations continue, you know, like, am I going to be more connected to my children, grandchildren, and then what will my relationship look like with my great-grandchildren? So I have a lot of wisdom I can glean from you, I'm sure, which is part of the story. Part of my job is getting wisdom from all kinds of people, because I sit down in homes all across, you know, Saskatchewan and the prairies, and get to hear people's stories, which is why I love my job so much. I've been doing this for 3 years, but for the last 15, I've been in people's living rooms and hearing their stories, which is what I consider actually a real blessing to be in this position and to do what I do. So thank you so much for letting me in your home. I know it's always strange having someone come in and meet you for the first time, let alone maybe talk about funeral arrangements. So I know it takes a bit of a step of courage. So I really appreciate you giving me the time to come and go over things with you. Now, just curious, are you familiar with Purple Shield, or have you ever heard of pre-arrangements
No.
prior to
No,
me
I
coming?
wasn't sure why you phoned.
Okay. Well, you had requested, you know, the information online about funeral expense planning, and so I work locally with
I
the
thought
funeral.
somebody sent me something in the mail.
Yeah, I totally understand, and most people do. It's a little bit of a unique service that we provide, because for everyone, this looks different, right? Everyone has their own wishes, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own families, and it's very difficult for us to know as a planning counselors what we need to do to service you and your family properly. So something that can't be answered in a little piece of paper that's sent in the mail or a quick phone call. So it is important that we spend a little bit of time to kind of understand a little bit more about you, so I can know how to design something that actually reflects who you are, which is really what we talk about when we're talking about our final expenses and funeral planning. Now, just to give you a little bit of an understanding, I like people to know where I'm going to go. I don't like to surprise people. So I'm going to take a few minutes to explain the benefits and why we pre-plan and what it does for your family. And then from there, I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you're thinking for yourself, in terms of your own wishes. Because really, the way this process is I need to know a little bit about you and what's important to you, which ends up really being what your wishes are. Because knowing what your wishes are helps us then to define and understand what your budget should be based on those wishes, as far as your funeral expense costs are concerned. And what?
Well, sorry, Ken, but I've got
Yeah.
lots of life insurance.
Yeah,
So I'm not interested in, because I've got life insurance.
I totally understand, and as do I. I mean, I think 95% of the people I visit have some form of life insurance. But this really, when you talk about pre-planning, it's actually not just about money. It's about pairing both an emotional need and a financial need together. So it helps to overcome a lot of the initial hit that families receive when they lose their loved one. It's really not about money. A lot of it has to do about how do they best reflect who you are, and so we'll talk about the difference between insurance and funding in a plan like Purple Shield, because it is what makes us unique. So as I was saying, if we were going to talk, once we figure out a little bit of what your wishes are, the budget then is established, because it is different from person to person. What you want is different from someone else I visited a couple of hours ago in their home, right? So I need to know who you are. I need to understand what's important to you and your family, what they need. And then that budget then allows us to talk about funding options with Purple Shield. So there's wonderful flexibility with our plans. And it's not just for those who can't pay for their funeral, it's for those who can as well. And again, I'll explain why it's important to do that. Now, the other part of what I find is the most important part. Once we've discussed about the funding options, it's important for me to spend some time getting you started, right? Taking the first step of recording what your wishes are. To me, it serves you, it serves your family, and it serves the local funeral home that's going to end up working with your family, because that's really the greatest gift you can leave your family, is to actually have a plan that goes alongside what your wishes. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, before I do that, have you done some work planning? Have you set some things in place as far as your own estate is concerned?
No, I told my kids what I want, and mine's kind of complicated, so I really don't know how to go about it.
Yeah, so wonderful. Part of what we provide, because it goes hand in hand with the final expense and funeral costs, is we do provide some information about will planning. Now, you said some really important words there that spoke to me. You said, my kids know what I want, it's really complicated. So you just said two things that kind of contradict each other as far as your kids' experience, is that, well, complication and your kids hearing what you want is what a lot of time causes the additional stress on families, because people think they've communicated what they want, but a lot of the times if you ask your kids, they may say, you know what, I'm actually not quite sure. I think you want this. Talk to the other kid, they say, I think she wants that. And guess where a lot of that strife comes from on the family when it comes to final expenses and making important decisions that you can't change later on. It's in those moments when you're emotional and dealing with the loss of a loved one. So it's really important that we actually create some tools and steps for the people or the person that's going to be handling your estate. We've actually taken the time to work with lawyers and planners to provide what's called the Will Planning Checklist and Information Guide. So this is a great tool that I would recommend that you look through. So you don't have an existing will, nothing in place right now, holograph will, anything that you've done on your own?
Well, no, I have an old will, which I should have.
Okay. Yeah, so at least you have something in place. But what I would do is I would actually use this guide to take a few moments and go through. You'll see in here there's some section right here about the decisions to make. So I would take your existing will and look over the questions that come up here. So oftentimes, number one here, who's your executor, right?
I've got joint executors, two
Okay.
friends of mine.
Okay, two friends of yours. Do you have also maybe a backup? I'm assuming, are your friends, are they the same age?
One is my age, one is 20 years younger.
Okay,
And
okay.
they're
Well,
both professional women.
okay, so that's a good plan, and they are, you're confident that they're going to follow your wishes. Very important to
Yeah,
select
except
someone.
my will is pretty old, so I
Yeah.
didn't get around to fixing that.
Yeah, and that's part of how this guidebook is going to help you. Now, if you feel confident that you have the right people in place as far as your executors are concerned, well, you don't need to make any changes to your will. Proposed guardian for children, I'm assuming at this point, there's no one that you're still providing for in your own home. Your kids are
Not in my
moved away.
home, but I
Yeah.
have an adult son who's a quadriplegic.
Okay, very good point. Have you made some plans in terms of trusteeship and how things are going to be handled after you're gone? Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, so it's I need to be clear about that. There are a lot of things that you mentioned here that I would recommend you need to speak to someone who is informed, educated, and can give you the best scenario for your son and your estate. Okay, the tools we provide are just kind of starting to steer you in that direction, but for sure on a more complicated estate that you're talking about, there would be some elements that I'd recommend you go see, a legal counsel. But yeah, proposed guardian for children. We talked about your son, so that's something you would need to look into. Organ donation, disposal of remains. Now, some people sign the back of their health card, for donations. So that can, be used at the time as far as, donating your organs to help another family in need. Burial versus cremation. Now, this is where the Purple Shield plan comes in, right? We're just starting to scratch the surface about all of these decisions that you would need to make and provide clarity for your family. So, and these are the questions I'm going to go over with you here in a little bit. But division of disposal of your remains, so cemetery plot, columbarium niche, spreading the ashes. There's already, on average, about 50 to 100 decisions that are made typically within the first 24 to 48 hours with a funeral home. So, it's a lot to kind of take on, and we help kind of, make the steps and put things in place to reduce the amount of those decisions. What kind of funeral memorial service you desire. Taking the time to write this down is really, really important. And I know it's not an easier conversation to bring up with your kids. If most people will go to their kids today and say, hey, let's gather for Thanksgiving dinner, and the first thing you bring up is, hey, now how do you guys want me to do in my funeral? What, do you think that it's ever going to happen that way, where everyone's in agreement and wants to talk about this that one time that you get everyone together? It's not going to happen. People try to, and they want to, and have the desire. But that's why it's so important that we give them something to get started, something that provides a foundation, is what we like to say. Division of estate among family and beneficiaries. This will take you through kind of the point-by points that you can look through to revise your will. Again, I definitely recommend you seek legal counsel, but it'll just give you some food for thought and some preparation for you before you see your will. It is, for sure, yes, yeah. Now, one other thing that I would recommend, if you're revising your will, have you done a power of attorney? Have you done any? No. Okay. Do you understand the difference between power of attorney and executor? No. I said easiest to explain it is executor takes over after death. Power of attorney is prior to. So a lot of decisions that often, even financial, for example, if you weren't able to make your own decisions, and pay the bills, you need someone that is entrusted to do those things on your behalf, right? And better to deal with it ahead of time than leave it for the courts to decide or family to argue about it, right? So again, you're lining your ducks up in a row. You're providing tools and key things so you're not leaving a big mess for your executor. And that's the last thing we want our family to go through at a difficult time, or your friends in this case. So again, I would recommend that's something to do. The rest of this guidebook, talks about household items. I wouldn't worry so much in your case maybe about filling out the whole thing again, but just use it as a guide and in preparation to going to see your lawyer to go over your estate. Now the funeral plan part, we're going to talk about that next. You already mentioned insurance, right? So most people, like I said, everyone that I deal with has some form of insurance. And insurance is really important. But we say oftentimes insurance is for the living, because you do need to leave something maybe to help deal with other final expenses and costs, maybe leave some money for your grandkids and things like that, right? That's why we purchase insurance. Maybe deal with a property that you own outside of your primary residence or your final taxes, right? However, Purple Shield, what makes us unique is that, again, it's an emotional benefit tied to the finance. So we're not just leaving money, because money sometimes causes more problems than it does solve them. So we don't want to just leave a chunk of cash in a bank account or in an insurance policy and leave 4 or 5 people there to fight about it. We want to pair it with your wishes, which has a way more power and goes a lot further in terms of actually helping people at a difficult time. And I'll explain a little bit more here in a second. The last thing here I find is a great tool, okay? And you can feel free to just read through this. It's a checklist for executors. You'll notice there's a bunch of things on here, making all the funeral arrangements, identifying checking savings accounts, locating insurance policies, applying for Canada pension benefits and other government forms and policies, paying for the funeral expenses. Well, the wonderful thing about Purple Shield for your executor and your peace of mind is we can actually check off this list when we have the Purple Shield plan. We've already nailed down 5 or 6 things already by you just starting a simple plan like this. Do you think that would make things easier for your family?
Probably.
Yeah. So it's just a great way to already think about, okay, I'm actually doing something now that's going to make things easier later on. Unfortunately, do you know what the death rate is in BC?
100%.
Exactly. And so it's something we all have to deal with. Yeah. And the numbers aren't different for me in Saskatchewan and Alberta. It's exactly the same. So across province, it's something that we all have to deal with. So taking a few moments now makes a huge difference for your family a little later on. So that's how to use this will planning checklist and information guide. Any other questions before I kind of go into the specifics about Purple Shield and what we do pre-planning? No, and like I said, this is yours to keep, so you can kind of review it. And of course, if you ever have any questions, you can call me as well. So let me focus our attention, as I said, on the benefits of pre-planning and what we do here with Purple Shield. So we've been around for over 55 years. A lot of times we are referred by other family members and friends and next generation because people have been on the receiving end of what we do. And once they feel the benefit of something that their family member invested in, they say, you know what, I need to do this for my own kids. Generation after generation after generation, it just becomes well, why wouldn't I do this, right? Because you actually receive it. And we're trying to do this in effect for your own kids and your own family right now. Assurant Life of Canada is the owner of Purple Shield. So if you see many of our documentation and paperwork, you'll see this assurance symbol. They underwrite every policy with Purple Shield. Essentially what that means is that we are protected against loss of benefit. It doesn't matter if you move away, if the funeral home closes down. In fact, even if our own company closed down, every dollar that's in a Purple Shield plan to cover your final expenses is covered against loss of benefit. So it doesn't go to the funeral home until you pass away, and it's protected. So your plan can't go anywhere. Do you understand? Assurance is the company that provides that protection. It's a not-for-profit organization that we pay into to ensure that what we say we're going to do is going to happen, that those funds are going to be there when the family needs it. There's no pulling the rug under your family. It's a guarantee, okay? The benefits of funeral planning really are pretty straightforward. Number one, I know it's an overused term, but peace of mind, honestly, I can't emphasize it enough to say that when the family actually has the benefit of your handwritten wishes and the finances to cover the expenses for those wishes, our families that have experienced this will say things like, it was so easy. We didn't have to worry about anything. The funeral home took care of all the details. We walked in, it was taken care of, it was even paid. In fact, there was even money left over, right? Doesn't that sound a lot different from, well, I didn't know where to start. I didn't know all these decisions had to be made. We weren't sure if this is what mom or dad wanted. And these are a lot of the times what you would hear with families who have walked into this experience. without the benefit of understanding what's going to happen in the next 1 hour or 2 hours with the funeral director. So that's really kind of one of the primary benefits of what we do. Does that make sense? The second component of what we do is because we don't want to just have money set aside, right? That's part of what we do, but we actually want to have the plan to go with it, right? And we plan for everything in life, right? I mean, if you think about what you did when you had your first grandchild, right? That date was coming, you prepared for it. Maybe you purchased something special for that grandchild, right? Because you had an anticipated date. As the date got closer, you made sure you checked off the list, right? Unfortunately, with final expenses and funeral arrangements, I don't know if you figured out what your day is, but I don't know when mine is. And we put it off, right? Yeah, it's not tomorrow. It's next month. That's right. It's just not going to happen to me. I don't need to worry. I've got time, right? But if you looked at your to-do pile and knew that next week was your final date, how many of those things all of a sudden would you tick off, right? That would reprioritize what you do even this week, right? And so that's what we're doing when we sit down now. We say, listen, let's stop playing with time because we can't manage that part. Let's do something we know that's going to be beneficial. Take it off the list and know that we've done our best to make things easier for the kids. And the way that we do that is by taking some time to write out your wishes. Now, the wonderful thing about Purple Shield, I don't know if you know every detail of what you want, all the songs you want at your funeral, or the, the verses read, or maybe it's a simple, just, graveside service with your family. But the nice thing with Purple Shield is you don't have to have it all figured out, right? It's taking the first step. Once you have the plan in place, we provide a Wishes and Memories book, which was actually brought together by funeral directors, by priests, ministers, all across Canada, to ensure that those decisions that have to be made right away are there for you to update, make changes, modify as you like. So you start with the foundation. That's what I always say. Start with the first step. Because once you have the plan in place, we can fill out the rest. You can actually have that tool in your disposal to fill out, adjust, maybe have those conversations with the kids. But the point that you need to understand is for you, it's to take that first step. You have to take control and ensure, hey kids, this is what I've done. It's not, do you think I should? It's, this is what I've done. It's a totally different conversation with your kids, and it's not on their shoulders anymore. And you take the onus to do what's best for them. And this is how we take care of that. So then you will be able to fill out your wishes, and they can follow it with dignity and respect to make sure that, what you want is clearly indicated for them, and they can follow your wishes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. No, one of the things that's very unique, and this is where sometimes insurance gets a bad rap, is that everyone's eligible with Purple Shield. So we don't turn anyone away for any reason whatsoever. It doesn't matter what your age is. You said you're what, 43, right?
78.
Okay, that's what it was. 78. So, so at 78, sometimes you go and try to get some other kind of protection through an insurance company, perhaps. They'll just say no outright, or you have a health concern. I'm sorry, we can't provide this benefit for you. Purple Shield's unique. Everyone eventually, unfortunately, 100% of our clients use their product at the end of the day. So we want to make sure that we actually prepare them and that it's available to everyone. So we don't turn anyone away for any reason. Because again, it's not just about money, it's about the planning part, and that's really important for us to distinguish. So everyone's eligible. The cash in Purple Shield is paid out right away. Have you ever heard of examples of family members who thought mom and dad's estate was going to be available to cover costs, and all of a sudden someone passed away and they couldn't access it? Do you have any stories or examples like that you've
Well, I
experienced?
got one true story. I don't know if it's to do with that, but
Yeah.
my two oldest sons in Fort St. John, they don't really get along that well anyway. Like, it's been dicey over the years with guys. So their father, my ex-husband, died 2 years ago in Grand Prairie, Alberta.
Yeah.
And he named them. They didn't know he named them as co-executors. Now, the one son really gets along with the stepmother, and one doesn't at all. And they never speak to each other again. It has been so ugly and awful, and
Yeah.
what a mess.
Yeah. And I mean, just in you describing.
Breaks my heart.
Yeah, you don't, I see it in your eyes, you don't even have to tell me that. And it's really, you know, in my work that I've done with families all across the prairies, you know, I hear so many unfortunate stories of families that have been, you know, torn apart, which seems silly if you think about the difference between whether someone wants a casket,
Well, it's
you know.
grief, I think, and the emotional component brings out the worst in people sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. If you think about trying to make decisions in a normal state of mind and then doing it under duress, do you think it's the same thing? It's totally different, right? You want to make decisions, wise decisions, when you have the ability to do so, not under duress. Unfortunately, most deaths occur without a whole lot of planning, you know, and anticipation. And when you take a little bit of time now to reprioritize and put things in place that makes that end of our journey a little easier, it's such an important thing. Funeral directors that I work with all the time say you can almost sense in the room before walking in the difference between a family who's pre-planned and one who hasn't. It's a night and day difference, right? And I know sometimes there's exceptions where everything goes well and the 6 sisters get together and they've all had this wonderful time planning. But it's not I would say that's the exception, not the rule, right? And so the benefit, I mean, cash in the plan is available immediately, so there's no delay. So if there's any kind of issue, for example, with the estate, okay, just because you have a will in place doesn't mean that they can't probate the will. And probating the will essentially is like a review of your estate, your net worth, your value. Things that you thought or your family thought were available all of a sudden aren't while this probate process is going through. That's the unique function of Purple Shield. The funds that are set in there are paid out immediately. Most funeral homes within 3 to 5 business days once they bill us. So all your family needs to know is contact McCaw Funeral Services, and the family will be served by them. That's what they do. They're wonderful at doing it. They're not going to have to worry about the financial side because they'll deal with us directly. The funeral home will deal with us. We write them a check, pay for the funeral costs. If there's money left over, we pay the balance out to the family or to the named beneficiary. So it's really so important to have the funding in there to cover the cost. Now, I keep saying money left over because one of the benefits of Purple Shield is we're not limited to just the cost of your funeral arrangements. You can actually plan up to $35,000 per person in a funeral plan like Purple Shield. Now, I'm not saying you need $35,000 for your funeral, so don't worry. And we'll talk about what we need for you specifically. But there's a lot of flexibility in that plan because the fact that it's a great way to leave some funds there to cover additional costs that often happen. Paying your utility bills, you know, while the executor works to close down the things that are tied to your name, for example. Instead of them having that responsibility, the Purple Shield plan can go towards that, right? It's not limited just for the funeral costs. So it's a wonderful plan that way. The cash is available to do that. So there's no unnecessary delays. That's one of the benefits. The other benefit is that Trudeau doesn't get any of the growth in your plan. The tax dollars, or the interest that's sitting in the Purple Shield plan will grow with interest tax-free.
What is it currently?
So it depends, of course, with the market. It's not the greatest interest we've had, but we're still performing better than most banks. And we're just under 2% for our average Purple Shield plan, tax-free. So again, if you're thinking about, well, I've maximized my tax-free savings accounts, and I need a little bit of, something here that I can store away that I don't want to be, taxed additional dollars for, the Purple Shield plan is also a great way to actually invest a little bit more into the plan outside of the funeral costs, because you've actually got some flexibility of what you can do with that. It's part of something called an eligible funeral arrangement, an EFA in the tax lingo. If you wanted to look it up or take the time to do that, but it's one of the unique features of tax-free planning. It's another way to actually get tax-free growth. So another reason. EFA, that's right. The money is also protected. So we talked about the fact that it avoids probate, but it's also protected from nursing home costs. Now, do you know how many nursing homes will charge a family member for nursing home care? Are you familiar with that process, or?
I'm not personally familiar with it, but I just have an idea how nursing homes work.
Yeah, a lot of times it's actually based on your ability to pay.
Right.
So the more you make, the more you have saved. Actually affects you negatively as you get older.
And the nicer place you have.
Exactly. So what's unique about Purple Shield is that it doesn't count against you if you ever require nursing home care. So it's another way to shelter funding, actually. So again, another reason why we say, well, if you have that
Declared income.
it's exactly, right? As if you got that money sitting in your bank account, it will be. So, we take care of a necessary expense, we put it in a sheltered and protected plan that is required to cover your funeral expenses. Because one way or another, at the end of the day, we're gonna need to pay for those services. But we deal with it ahead of time. Now, the other part too is legal fees and estate fees don't affect what's in the plan too. So you're not gonna get additional charges because you've got this chunk of cash sitting in a plan to cover your final expenses. So it's also covered that way.
So that's for my beneficiary, or?
Yes, any money that's left over, as I said, if you pay the funeral costs, for example, let's say we had $12,000 in your Purple Shield plan, and it grew to 14 while you were waiting to use it. That day came along, and the funeral costs were 13,000. That additional $1,500 is distributed between your between your beneficiaries as you've laid out in the plan. So we could name 1, 2, 3 grandchildren. We could name a favorite charity. So there's lots of neat little flexibilities like that with the plan here. And how much better is it for your family to walk into a funeral home and say, not only was the funeral covered, but Mom also left a little extra for us at the end, right? Night and day difference between that way. The other component too is, if we don't deal with this today, do you think the average cost of a funeral 10 years from now is going to be the same thing?
I know when my dad died in Fort St. John
Yeah.
35, 40 years ago, it was a couple $1,000s for a burial.
Yeah.
I
And
think it's a lot more now.
it's not more now, right? What do you think the average cost of a funeral is today?
Burial or cremation?
Oh, you name it.
When my brother died in in Prince George, we cremated him about 8 years ago,
Mhm.
and I think we paid Aspen's funeral home about $5,000. That was for cremation, right?
Yes, that's right.
If
Yeah.
he'd have been buried, it would have been astronomical to transport the body.
Yeah, maybe what, 8,000-10,000 at that time?
Yeah, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. So I adjust a little bit to inflation for today's costs, and we often say depending on which region you are, maybe between $8,000 and $10,000. And I'm not just talking about the basic cost of the funeral home, right? Cremation, you can have a basic cremation with no service, nothing for the family, and keep your costs down. The nice thing with Purple Shield is that we do a plan that you want. We don't have to do a plan that the funeral home necessarily wants. We want to do what you need and what your family needs. It's a combination of those things to make sure that they can grieve the way they need to. So it's important to think about what they need, but also speak into what you want and make sure that your wishes are followed. So there's two components to a funeral, and that's why we always say it's good to have consider yourself and also the people that you leave behind. We'll get to that here in a second. But the fact that when we deal with a plan now, we essentially are dealing with the inflation cost, right? Some funeral homes will actually lock in the funeral costs based on your
They do
wishes
that?
today.
Yeah.
Some do, not all of them. And the way that we combat that is those who don't lock in the price. That's why we provide that interest that grows tax-free. Because essentially, in our 55-year history, as long as the plan is properly funded from the beginning, our plans have typically kept up with the cost of inflation, right? There's no guarantee because we don't know what it's going to be in 15 years, right? But we do our best to try to keep those costs at bay, right? And we are very proactive in following up with you, 5 years from now. Take a look at your plan saying, okay, you know what, here's what we have in here, here's what the cost has gone to, and we're actually right in line with what we need to be. But the nice thing about Purple Shield is we can always add to it later on if we need to. But it's making sure we have that foundation started now. Okay. The flexibility of the plan. Now, You said you were, what, 49 again?
That's right.
No.
And old.
We'll just say 78, just to call it even there. But a few less options than there was maybe 3 years ago, but we still have options that we can put a plan in place. If you had the funds to pay it outright, it's great, dollar for dollar. If you have those funds sitting in your checking account now to cover your final expenses, let's move it into something that's actually going to do better for you and your family rather than complicate it with probate and some of the other things that can often happen with funds that are set aside. If you don't have the funds to pay it outright, we still have options, right? And that's why it's important you take the first step, you get it started now, because there's flexibility that we offer with the plan. So if you need to do a 3-year, maybe even a 5-year plan, we can find something likely within your budget that will work for you and ensure that peace of mind starts now, right? Instead of worrying and leaving the issue to your kids to deal with, right? Most people don't want to have that financial burden on their kids, right? And that's why we take care of it. So the flexibility is very, very unique that way. That's why when I was 38, I paid for my funeral, right? I didn't strike a check for $8,000. I assigned one restaurant meal a month to make sure that my family had the peace of mind to ensure that my costs are covered and my decisions are made. They don't have to worry about it anymore. Makes me feel better about the dollars that I'm putting into it. So flexibility. The other unique feature that we added a few years ago with our plan is it's called the travel plan, the worldwide travel plan. Now the worldwide part is a little bit misleading because it makes you think that you have to leave the country to make it work. It's actually good as soon as you step 100 kilometers away from your primary residence. Now you already gave me 2 cues that you actually go sometimes up to maybe where your kids are located, at least 3 to 5 hours away from your
I
residence.
travel quite a bit, yeah.
Quite a bit.
And also we go to Mexico.
Well,
once a year.
there you go. Do you have any room in your suitcase for me next time you go? So you want to ensure that you have, if something were to happen and you were away from home, do you think your costs increase? Do you think it is more complicated to bring you back here?
I never thought of it.
Yeah. So the Purple Shield plan we have, and we partnered with a company called McKinnon and Bose. Any any Canadian military that is repatriated, not U.S., Trump takes care of that. Any Canadian military that's repatriated comes back through McKinnon and Bose. #1 company in Canada dealing with families who've lost loved ones away from home. As soon as you step away from 100 kilometers or about 1 hour's drive from your primary residence, we'll take care of everything. Your family calls one phone number. Doesn't matter if you're up north in Mexico visiting family, we'll take care of bringing you back. No questions asked. Call one number and it's taken care of by us. Your executor is not going to have to worry about, do we?
Is there an added cost for that?
There is. Now, it's not a big difference on your monthly cost, which I'll show you here when we go through the plan. But it's significant if something ever happens to you. Just a trip from the hospital, 300-400 kilometers makes it worthwhile because you pay a per kilometer rate, and this takes care of you anywhere in the world, up to $100,000 of coverage. So you could be in the Philippines and we'll still bring you back. So it's a wonderful plan, and I almost always recommend it. The final document. Sorry, go ahead.
Ken, when I go to Mexico, I always buy travel insurance. Wouldn't that look after it?
That's a great point. Now, most people, it's a requirement when you travel to have some form of insurance. And most insurance companies will tuck in something to do with repatriation, which is returning the body. However, it's usually quite limited. For example, Blue Cross, they might have a $4,000 repatriation amount, which is actually required for you to send out the bills, or your family members to send the bills to them in order to get reimbursed. Ours is a no-fuss option. You call the number and we take care of it. There's no sending out receipts. There's no limit to your repatriation. That's why we pretty much say it doesn't matter where you are, we bring you home. The family's not going to have to worry about
For no
costs.
extra charge?
No, that is part of what I'm going to go over with you on the cost and the things there. But that's why I say it. Most of the time it's a few dollars difference on your payment, but pretty significant in terms of what it takes care of. So unless you're in a nursing home, never going anywhere, which is not your case, then I would recommend it for you. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, it does.
One last thing, I just want to talk about our services. The final documentation service is a wonderful service we added to our tools for our executors to make sure they're protected in the last few years. We partnered with a company called Peacehold. They're based in Ontario. In fact, the owner I met a few times already, and you just hear his compassion for helping families. This is the reason why he started the company. Have you ever been an executor, or you ever had a family member in
I
that
looked
process?
after my mom. She was 93 and she
Yeah.
didn't have much, so it wasn't that difficult. But it did take me, I don't know, eight or more months to finalize. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it again. I
Yeah.
don't like the job.
You've had the experience already to know, and your mom, like you said, she's 93. It's not like she was carrying, 600 credit cards and, linked into Facebook and all the other things. Likely, maybe she was, but there was still enough to keep you busy for 8 months, right? And so,
And also, I didn't know if I was missing something because I'd never done it before, and I thought, am I doing this right? What am I missing?
and it's true. Yeah, when it's the reason why I go to see a tax specialist when I bring my taxes. I did it a while by myself, but I always lost sleep sometimes because I wasn't sure if I didn't cross the T properly or dotted the I. You don't want to be stuck with something later on that you forgot to deal with, right? So this is why we partner with them. These guys are expert administrators with final documentation and paperwork. With one phone call, they will go over everything that needs to be taken care of with your executor, ensuring that we've covered government forms and documentation and paperwork, life insurance policies, programs like, co-op shares, air miles, Shoppers Drug Mart, travel rewards. If you start to write down all the things that are tied to your name or sitting in your purse, it would take you a little while to gather all that documentation.
How in the event of the death of a person, how do they find out that that person has died and it's time for them to go to work?
And that's the wonderful thing with Purple Shield. Because we partnered with these organizations, when someone uses their Purple Shield plan, we actually follow up with the family. The documentation service will contact the executor, and they will start the process and help them through filling out all these forms and paperwork. So it will just move forward by itself, a natural process.
So your company can lets my executor know that I'm not here. Is that what happens?
So yes, that's
Or
correct.
lets them know?
The funeral home will contact us for the Purple Shield payout, and we will then notify the documentation service, which will follow up with your executor.
Okay.
So it's a very smooth process that starts with the funeral home. That's why we always say all your family needs to know is contact the funeral home, and the rest will follow. Now, there's a little bit of work that comes with this documentation service. I don't know if you're an organized person, if you have a binder of information you've already kept aside with all your paperwork, kind of sort of, maybe little pieces here and there. I feel bad saying this, but I know mine is stuck in a filing cabinet, right? And I have to kind of get organized myself. But it's so important to take some time to bring all of that and funnel it into one easy place for your family. So we keep this alongside your Purple Shield plan. The documentation service will actually mail out some forms that you can work on for your executors, so you can write out life insurance policy information, social media accounts, driver's license, health card, all of these different things that need to be collected by the government. And it sits with your Purple Shield plan, likely with your will, all together in the designated area that you let your family know about, right? If it's under the turkey in the freezer, make sure they know that, right? If it's in the filing cabinet, make sure they know that. If it's at the bank, make sure they know it and they have the key to access it, right? The key is information, making sure they're informed. You don't want them to figure this out at the worst time. But the documentation service, really just think of it as having a professional there, funneling all the information. We fill out all the paperwork on your behalf, mail it out to the executor with a cover letter, all the documentation that they need to sign for, even the envelope comes attached to a piece of paper. They fill it out, sign it.
That's quite a service.
It is, and I almost always recommend it because I just think even with an uncomplicated process like you had with your mom at 93, it still took 8 months, and this just makes things much, much easier for your family. So those are the benefits, and that's the way the Purple Shield plan works. Do you have any questions about that before I ask you a little bit about what you're thinking for yourself?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. So I'm going to take a few minutes here to go over what your wishes are for yourself. Do you want me to do that part, John, or do you want me to like actually break down kind of wishes and cost and then closing, or?
I think the closing part is probably important. Does everyone want to see him, it's more of a closing, right, instead of specific, is that fair to say?
I'd like to see how he presents the cost.
Yeah.
How he presents it?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you, this is the part here now where I find out a little bit more about what you're thinking for yourself. So Kate, you said right now you are 78, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, what are you thinking for yourself? So big picture, traditional earth burial, cremation, or undecided, on the fence? Where
Well, I was undecided, but my family's used to earth burial.
Earth burial.
I live in Prince George. I have family plots in Fort St. John,
Yes.
so that's what I'm kind of looking at.
Okay, so leaning towards earth burial.
Yeah.
So typically what I say, the nice thing about with the plan is even if later on you decide to make some changes and you think, well, you know what, I'm going to have a viewing and then cremation to follow, you have to remember the plan, whatever's left over or extra in the plan goes back to the family anyway, so it's better for us to actually plan for the more expensive and know that if something happens and you go with a smaller option later on, the funds that are left over are going to go to your family anyway. So that's why we say, you know what, we make sure we have what we need to cover the cost. So earth burial, are you tied to a church? Would you have any kind of...
No, I don't.
No? Okay. So maybe with a family gathering, it would be more like a celebration of your life or a service of remembrance, or...
Probably a celebration, yeah.
Celebration, yeah. Any idea where that would take place?
I believe in Fort St. John.
Fort St.
Or
John?
maybe one in each, I don't know.
Yeah,
Probably
okay.
gonna-
Where would the burial take
The-
place? Do you have a plot already?
Yes,
Okay.
in Fort St. John.
In Fort St. John.
Yeah. And that's already paid for. so.
Wonderful, excellent. Is there someone there already that you're joining, or is
A
this?
mother, a father, a brother, a
Okay.
sister.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So it's already taken care of. Have you looked into whether there's some additional costs with, for opening and closing?
Well, I
or-
paid for my dad's years ago,
Mhm.
so many years ago. So I own the plot, but it's gonna be opening and closing, so
Fees, yeah,
I'm guessing 200 or 300.
okay, yeah. So tell me then, what would it look like, this celebration in Fort St. John? Your family would come out
Well,
from,
first, I would have to pay the local Prince George Funeral Home,
Mhm.
make me pretty, put me in the box, so that's where the big cost would be, I think.
Yeah, yeah. What's the name of that funeral home?
Asman's Dignity Memorial. And then the mileage, so
Mhm.
I'm probably looking at 10 grand
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah. And then a burial would follow with a family, like an interment private for the family, or would it be family and friends? What would that look like?
That would be in
Fort
Fort St. John, because they gotta ship me off to Fort St. John
Yeah.
and then service there, I don't know, with Hammer's Funeral Home. Couple, 2,000 or 3,000, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think your estimate is pretty close here, based on today's costs. So, again, remember, because we have the ability to make sure we protect the family from costs, we can actually add a little bit extra in there, make sure that those costs are covered. If there's a little bit left over, it's coming back to them anyway, so it's better to have a little bit more than not quite enough, right? So, as far as the monument or headstone, did you have something in mind once the burial takes place? What were you thinking for?
When Mom died, Dad was already buried years ago, so I dealt with Hammer's Funeral Home and I got because I was the executor, right? So I got from Renfrew Memorial, I think we used. I think it was over 3,000. It was a pillow type.
Yes, yeah. Is that kind of what you're thinking for yourself?
Yeah,
Philip?
it would be a single instead of a double.
Of course, yeah.
But I
Yeah.
paid $3,000 for, over $3,000.
I know, it's another added cost, right? And that's, we typically recommend that we kind of have all of those taken care of.
So that my kids wouldn't have to pay for it.
Exactly. I mean, you do get things like a Canada Pension Plan benefit. Sometimes people say, well, what about my $2,500, which could go towards it. However, there's no guarantee it'll come right away, and it's government, so we don't know if it's always going to be in place. So I always say it's better to have things taken care of here. And if they get that benefit, it's coming back to them anyways. But
Probably should put $3,000
yeah.
for a stone.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think realistically, if we were looking at your funeral, let's say, what we said, 10, maybe, let's go with let's just say 18, just to be safe. Again, knowing that we're gonna also have some additional costs in there. Again, this kind of protects you from those additional costs in there. Now, the only other additional cost with Purple Shield are those two services that I recommended, the travel plan and the document service.
And that's a one-time fee, is it?
It can be,
You don't
yeah.
send an annual bill or something?
Well, it depends on how we fund it, which we'll talk about next year. But for the sake of calculating here, so if you did pay it outright based on today's costs, you'd be looking just about $20,000, $19,230 if we calculated all of your costs in there.
At my age, can you still offer payments?
That's one of the options that I'm going to go over with you, because you still have the option of a 3 and a 5 year plan. Have you set aside any funding to cover?
Well, no, I told you earlier, I got lots of life insurance, so I thought that would pay for everything.
Well, it can, but the problem with life insurance, it's not always available right away. Sometimes there's delays in paying it out, and we want to make sure that we pair this plan with the funeral home, so that they're going to be able to handle all of your wishes, and the funds are going to be set aside through the funeral home. So there's going to be no delay, and it's going to help your family actually narrow in your wishes according to what you've written down. The funding there, it's going to help them not do all of the emotional decisions, because they know that you've actually placed something based on wishes that you've already written down. So that's different than the life insurance part that we talked about earlier. So
That makes sense.
if we look at
Well, how about, Ken,
Yes.
I've got some money put away. What about if I do a single pay for half of it?
okay,
Let's go to 20,000.
okay.
A single pay, 10,000, and make payments on the other. What do payments look like?
I will calculate it for you. So with a 3-year option, and what I'm showing you is monthly. You can also go quarterly, semi-annual, annual. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. It doesn't change the price. But if your budget is better seen on an annual basis, then this is an option for you. So here, if we look at the 3-year with a $10,000 plan, your monthly payments would be $594.36. So obviously it's higher, but it actually pays out the plan quicker. So you pay the least amount of insurance cost. And 5-year option, $373.65 per month. And again, yes, it drops down a couple $100, which might make it a little bit easier on your budget. But it gives you the option to kind of fit into what you're able to do. Now, would it be easier for you with monthly or annual cost?
Well, I kind of like the 5-year, but before we go there, how about medical questions? Because when I got life insurance years ago, we had to pee in the glass and go and see the doctor, and
I'm just going to grab my glass. That's actually, for me, the way the plan works is very simple. Typically, there's a 2-year waiting period. Okay, so essentially, if something happened in the first 12 months, let's say, each payment that you put into the additional cost, outside of your lump sum, there's no additional cost, there's no waiting period on the $10,000 you put in. That's available right away.
Well, that's because I paid.
You paid lump sum, single pay. But on the additional unfunded component we're doing monthly, if you passed away in 12 months while you were making payments, every dollar that's in there would go towards your costs. So you're not losing any money.
12 months, 1 year.
It's 2 years. I was just giving an example of the first 12 months. But up till 2 years, if something happens, we would pay back what you put into it. Not only that, plus 6% interest. So we're actually, it's a very good savings plan for the remaining balance, okay?
Okay.
Once the 2-year waiting period is over, full coverage. So even if something happens to you in year 3, 4, or 5 of a 5-year, we're still paying out that $20,000 plus interest, okay? Now, the interest drops down to our standard, just under 2%, but then you know you've got full coverage, right? So one way or another, the key is to get it started. The other component too is once you have the plan started, you can actually shorten your term. So say we started on a 5-year, and a year from now you decide, you know what, I can manage this 3-year payment. We do a lump sum catch-up payment. So maybe a few $1,000s to get caught up, and you carry on as a 3-year. So we've actually knocked 2 years off of your plan. The key is to get it started because of this 2-year waiting period. Now, I said everyone starts with a 2-year waiting period, but depending on your health, we actually might not even have a 2-year waiting period. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few health questions. You just say yes or no to these questions, and this will determine whether or not we can avoid this 2-year waiting period. So here's the questions.
Great. Questions.
Questions. So if you said yes to one of those options, well, that's why it's so important to get going with the plan, because now we've actually started the timer on that 2-year waiting period. In the meantime, if something happened, which we can't control, at least you know you've got partial funding for your funeral, plus savings that you're putting in every month. So it's benefiting, you're getting closer to the goal.
Okay, Ken, I have a question. Can I pay this off? Like, I'm expecting some reserve money coming in
Yes.
January.
Okay, excellent.
Can I
Yeah.
just pay that all off?
You can, yeah. Once
Single, you know, just pay.
you can. Now, there's an administrative fee. It's $200 when you pay it off. But if you think about how much you're going to save on the insurance cost, so it's the flexibility that's nice about it. That's why we say we get it started. That way you know you've got the coverage and the peace of mind that you've taken care of those necessary costs. Would that make sense? Would that work for you?
That does. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we take a few minutes here to write down your information. As I said, we're going to record your wishes and make sure that we help the funeral home by making sure we've got your basic wishes in place. Your date of birth is? There you go. That was